It's been nearly 6 months since college football completed the first ever 12-team playoff to overall meh results. The NCAA announced last week that they'll be doing away with the automatic buys for the conference winners in next year's college football playoff, which is great if you're in the SEC or the Big Ten. But I don't think that fully fixes the issues they had last season. So let's dive into that and more on another episode of Big Smooth Sports. We have a title bumper now? This channel moves further and further away from its motto, every day. We're slow at work. Now, it's been 6 months since the end of the 2024 college football season, but I feel like that's been enough time where we can take an honest look at what was the best iteration of crowning a college football champion ever. The tournament did have its share of complaints and issues that we can now examine and tweak with a clear head in the college football offseason. First things first, congrats to Ryan Day for doing the only thing he could do to save his job: win a national championship, which highlights the insanity of Ohio State fans. You people are ridiculous. During the new college football playoffs inaugural season, I feel like we had over a month of sports news coverage detailing every little problem with the new system. Now, were there problems in the first year? Yeah, the committee wasn't very clear on how the seeding worked, and they definitely weren't clear on how strength of schedule factored into the equation. Don't get me wrong, this inaugural 12-team college football playoff has been the best version of the college football championship process, albeit this year was slightly underwhelming. But I have a pretty good idea that reworks the current system to be more clear in its criteria, fair in its selections, and ultimately more entertaining. And I think the answer is right in front of us. Now, I know what you're thinking. Immediately expanding on an already huge expansion is diluting the product, and you're probably right. A 16-team playoff is definitely the most you could ever expand to. The college football regular season takes about 3 months, and the playoffs this year took a month just by itself. Plus, adding too many teams to a playoff would be reminiscent of that scene from basketball.
Hi there, I'm Dan Patrick.
And I'm Kenny Mayne.
With the first 7 months of the basketball postseason out of the way, the playoff picture is now starting to emerge.
So with last night's victory over Boston, next week the Bears must beat Indianapolis in order to advance to Charlotte. That's in an effort to reduce their magic number to 3.
Right, and then the Bears can advance to the National Eastern Division North to play Tampa.
So if the Bears beat Detroit and Denver beats Atlanta in the American Southwestern Division East Northern, then Milwaukee goes to the Denslow Cup. Unless Baltimore can upset Buffalo and Charlotte ties Toronto, then Oakland would play LA and Pittsburgh in a blind choice round robin. And if no clear winner emerges from all this, a 2-man sack race will be held on consecutive Sundays until a champion is crowned.
But a 16-team bracket still fits into that 4-week playoff window that currently exists, and doesn't add any more games than Ohio State could have played this year. Football is a brutal game, so adding more games to the amateur level, and I use that term very lightly, isn't in the best interest for player safety and the ultimate game product on the field. This isn't March Madness, nor should it be. Now, in this new 16-team bracket, you will notice there is no longer a bye week for the top 4 teams. Normally, a bye in a tournament is supposed to be an advantage for the team receiving it, because they automatically move on to the next round without facing the threat of elimination by losing to another team. But in this current format, this awkwardly seeded and aligned bracket, the teams that received a bye really weren't given an advantage. And it showed, because all of the teams that got one lost. My theory is they lost because they had to take a month off of playing football games. Then when they had to come back, they were forced to play a top 8 team in the country who were fresh off a huge playoff win. I mean, they technically made it further in the bracket, but a month off of playing games is a long time in football. Then to hit the ground running is a tall order for any college football team. Honestly, my favorite part of the 12-team playoff was that first week of games. The Homefield Advantage that was brought to each of the 4 campuses that hosted a game is what I can only describe as the peak college football experience. I mean, even Pat McAfee could feel it on the set of College Game Day.
You feel it. Football is radiating through these old-ass buildings.
So if you're going to add more teams to the college football playoff, you better add more of the best aspect of the 12-team format, which was the home field advantage for the top seeds in the first round. Nothing against the big bowl games like the Peach Bowl and the Cotton Bowl, but they feel very soulless. They're big dome stadiums with an overall corporate vibe that will never compare to what the first round felt like this year. I mean, you had the in-state rivalry, Indiana and Notre Dame, the attempted takeover of the Horseshoe when Tennessee tried to create Neyland North. This round of the college football playoff was electric. And here's the most interesting part. We didn't see one good game. The expansion of the college football playoff over the years has been about giving deserving teams a shot at the title. Well, that and money. Mostly money. Well, almost exclusively money. But they sold it in a way to answer the question, what if an undefeated team like the 2016 UCF or the 2023 Florida State teams, who never got that opportunity, were given a chance to prove themselves? In sports, people love the underdog story. It's literally the plot of every sports movie ever. And with the first ever 12-team playoff, the underdog was finally given the opportunity to write history. And they all shit the bed. To begin last season, I was a very big believer in the Indiana Hoosiers. So much so that I chose them as my online dynasty team in College Football 25. Streams available now on Twitch.
Shameless plug.
Coach Cignetti and the Hoosiers were a very fun team to watch all season, and the media eventually came around to pay attention to them. But in past years, they would have been a textbook example of what if. Because despite going 11-1, with their strength of schedule, they would have been easily left out of every other previous form of the college football playoff. Now, it's not Indiana's fault that the Big Ten has 18 teams, and the schedule they were given was very weak. But with this new format, they were given that shot. And that is what college football fans have been asking for decades. And it's the same story with SMU, Clemson, ASU, and Boise State. It's just a bummer for the fans that when they got that opportunity, they blew it.
You blew it! You had it all and you blew it!
But you need to take this example with a grain of salt because the sample size is literally just one. Here's a fun fact. The favorites ran the table in the first ever 12-team college football playoff. The team that was the odds-on favorite went 11-0 in this format. Even more impressive, the favorites went 10-1 against the spread. The only underdog to cover was Arizona State, and I may be biased as an alumni, but that was textbook targeting. Breathe. We are not going to relive that. The seeding of the 12-team playoff was very weird because there was no real defined framework on how it was determined. There were some loose, vague guidelines, but it very much seemed up to the interpretation of the committee. For example, the 12th ranked team in the nation, ASU, gets a bye, while the number 3 team in Texas has to play a first-round game against Clemson because they lost in overtime to the number 2 seed Georgia in the SEC championship. And there was a lot of talk by sports media that the 5 seed had an easier path to the championship than the 1 seed.
Trying to figure out how we can get to number 5. I don't think there's a path.
5 is the spot.
5 is the spot.
5 is where you want to be.
Without a doubt.
And there seemed to be a lot of truth to that as it turned out. In a 16-team bracket, it is a lot easier to seed because it is very straightforward. Just take the top 16 ranked teams, with the top 8 of those hosting a first-round playoff game. But I have another idea to add a unique wrinkle to the bracket and the seeding to give more credence to the long-shot Cinderella stories. Now, automatic bids have been a staple in the NCAA March Madness basketball tournament, and it's a simple rule. If you win your conference, you are automatically in the postseason tournament. But with a 16-team playoff, and how much shorter a college football season is, it gets a little more complicated. There needs to be more qualifiers to admit an automatic bid to teams of lower conferences. In conferences like the MAC, Sunbelt, and American, they're often overlooked because they play inferior schedules. Now, a team like Army, who hung around the bottom of the top 25 rankings all season, went 11-1, and easily won their conference, in my opinion, should be given a shot. So let's set these parameters for an auto bid from a lower conference. Rule number 1, you must win your conference championship. Rule number 2, no more than 2 losses. And number 3, you must be ranked in the top 25 at the end of the season. Now, let's use this past season as an example and seed this hypothetical 16-team bracket. Here is a blank 16-team bracket, and here is the top 25 rankings after the championship week. Quick side note, I know that Army went on to lose to Navy the following week, and that would have been a nightmare for the committee in this hypothetical auto bid situation that I just laid out. So I'm going to gloss over that fact because they still fit the criteria that I arbitrarily made up. So here are the teams in the final top 25 that won their conference championships and would automatically make the college football playoff. Then from here, it's pretty straightforward. You just go down the rankings. You'll notice that Boise State and Arizona State are in the bottom half of the 16 qualifiers. And not only will they not get a bye because there are no longer byes, they won't even get a home game in the first round. The 4 new teams that are added to this expanded field are Army because of the auto bid, Alabama, Miami, and Ole Miss would get the nod over South Carolina because of their head-to-head game earlier in the year. Let's say Army had lost the American Conference Championship to Tulane. Tulane would not have gotten an auto bid because they lost 5 games on the season and they weren't in the top 25. In that scenario, South Carolina would have made the final field. But let's look at these matchups. Oregon would host Cinderella Army at Autzen Stadium. This is what being a top-seeded team should entail, an on-paper easiest path to the championship. Indiana would host Boise State in Memorial Stadium where they went undefeated. Arizona State at Notre Dame would have been an awesome first-round game, especially with how both teams played in the actual college football playoff, but also because the Devils versus Touchdown Jesus is a great headline. Penn State probably runs all over Miami, but Miami gets a shot at redemption after blowing a 21-point lead to Syracuse in the final week.
Hey, Dabo Swinney, congrats, I got you in, baby.
Ohio State plays host to Alabama, which would have had every executive at ESPN creaming their jeans, and honestly would have overshadowed every other game in the first round. Ole Miss would travel to Austin to take on the Longhorns, and this is an interesting matchup because they didn't get to meet up in SEC play. Tennessee doesn't need to invade another team's stadium because they would host their own game against SMU, which I think they roll at home. And finally, Georgia would have to play Clemson at home. And with their injury situation, Clemson could have been the Cinderella run that every fan was looking for in this expanded bracket. Every team who hosted a game in the actual 12-team playoff would have hosted a game in the first round in this scenario as well. Plus you get home games in Eugene, Knoxville, Athens, and Bloomington, which is worth the expansion in itself. These hypotheticals are fun, but we are most likely stuck with this current 12-team playoff format for at least the next 5 years. And with the new seeding rules, hopefully next year's playoffs is a little more interesting. While the first year was completely chalk, featuring no upsets, no magical runs, and if we're being honest, of the 11 games we saw 2, maybe 3 good games? We have to remember that this is just the first year of what is undoubtedly the best version of the playoffs we as fans have ever witnessed. Because it wasn't that long ago, they used to just pick a team and call them champions. Then we let a computer pick 2 teams and made them play. Now, there will always be a conversation to who should be the last team in and who got snubbed. But with a 12 or 16 team playoff, you're now arguing over which 3-loss team deserves a chance, when it used to be a 1 or even a 0-loss team was getting shafted. So don't ever overlook that fact. What would you add, take out, tweak? Let me know everything down in the comments below. Subscribe if you haven't, and other than that, playa!